Hello,
Take it away.
everyone, and welcome. Wow, what a great turnout. It looks like I'm not the only one doing last minute cards. So, with the use of our time today, I'm going to be going through six different really easy designs. And I know you only have two of the cards. So, if you only have two and there's a specific design that you want, just wait for me to do that card and then you can follow along then. So, some extra things that I have, Lauren, if you could spotlight my table. Okay, perfect. So some extra things that I have, in addition to the things in your kit, I have a size 10 round Princeton Neptune brush, Aquafine Alizarin Crimson so that I have all the primaries. And then I have some household items. So I have a straw, I have some salt, I have masking tape or painter's tape, whatever you have is great. Some plastic wrap, and then if you have a plate or some palette paper, that'll be great, just so you have some extra mixing space. And I'll always use a rag instead of paper towel, especially when I'm using watercolor, just because you can reuse it, throw it in the wash, and you're not wasting a bunch of paper towel when you're working. So we're going to get started. I'm going to start with the Ice Ice Baby one. This is a really fun, really easy one. And this is using the plastic wrap first. So what you're going to do for this one, so you should have two blues. You want to go with the ultramarine dark for this one, because for this technique, it's best to use as dark a color as you have. So I'll get my blank greeting card out. So what you're going to do, because you're going to do a wash application for the first layer, you're going to want to use a larger brush if you have one. So I'm going to use my size 10 round. And all I'm going to do is take that blue and spread it across the entire page. And don't be afraid to go really dark, because watercolors typically dry 50% lighter. And you want to use a decent amount of water so that it stays wet. Now that I've wet my entire card, I'm going to go in with a sheet of plastic wrap. I can just grip it here. And all I'm going to do is lay it on top. And you'll notice it kind of clings to certain areas. So once you put it on, you don't want to touch it. You just want to leave it. And we're going to put it to the side, wait for it to dry, and then go back to it to do our calligraphy. So that's one card already halfway done. So you see, they're really quick,
Can you
really easy.
can you give us a minute?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, going awful fast here.
Is the plastic wrap the main thing you could use for this technique, or are there other materials you could get a similar effect with, Kelly?
So you could use like a plastic bag. That would work as well. If you don't have plastic wrap, you could also use parchment paper. They may give a slight different effect, but still very similar. And it's okay, you may notice some slight warping. That's okay if it does that because you can flatten it easily after. It's just because you really saturated it with water. So I'm going to move on to the next card if everyone's ready for me to do so. And this one, the reason we're doing these ones first is because we're covering the whole area and then we have to wait for it to dry in order to do the next step. So we'll come back to these ones. So for this one, we're doing kind of like a cozy blanket plaid effect. So with this effect, you want to use masking tape. And if you don't have masking tape, you can use a ruler. So I'll show you both ways here. So with the masking tape, you're going to want to tape in a diagonal. Going across your card. Whenever you're using masking tape for this kind of technique, when you're doing watercolors, it's actually best to use painter's tape instead of masking tape. You may think that they're the same, but they're a different adhesive. So masking tape may be a little bit harder to rip off. It may tear a little bit. So painter's tape is a better option if you have it, but if you don't, no worries. So if I were to just use a ruler for this technique, all I would do is take a line and draw diagonal lines across my page. So for this wash, I'm going to start out with my larger brush. So I'm going to use my size 10 round. And similar to what we did for the first card, I'm just going to block off areas and saturate my page.
Kelly, what about artist tape? Is that similar to painter's tape?
Yep, artist tape is perfect. So I'm using the alizarin crimson, but you can use any color you'd like. And you'll see my masking tape is pretty thick. You can use really thin masking tape or thick, it doesn't matter. Okay. Now, without taking the masking tape off of the page, I'm just going to lift it from my surface just so I can set it to the side to dry. I'll make some room up here.
Donna actually had a good comment on the tape too. If it's too sticky, so it will tear the paper when removed, you can run it across your pants or a piece of fabric. The part to adhere the tape kind of takes a little bit of the extra sticky off of it, so it doesn't tear your paper. I've
Oh,
definitely done
that's a really good point.
I have a quick question. I was running downstairs to get my plastic wrap when you started.
Mhm.
Are we pre-wetting before we start painting?
I didn't. So I just, when I was doing this one, all I did was I took the ultramarine deep and I made it as dark as possible and just went throughout the entire page with that color.
Okay. And like with the red too, the red card, same thing.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
You don't have to pre-wet.
All right. Thanks.
All right. I'm carefully just lifting this off. Set it to the side. We're gonna do this card next, which is one of my favorites. Usually during the holidays, I will just do this one. Everyone will get this exact same card because I love it so much. So this one, we're going to use what's called a wet on wet technique, which is not something that we did in the first card. So what it is you're going to wet the areas where you want the color first, and then you're going to drop color in, and you're going to let the paint do its work. So you'll see when I do this, it just travels and you add color. So I'm going to use my finer brush, which is the one that you used in the kit. This is the Princeton Aqua Elite. And the reason I want to use this brush is because the Aqua Elite brush is a synthetic Kolinsky sable. So it has more snap to it and can hold a really fine point, but holds a lot of color in the belly. Whereas the brush I was using before, the Princeton Neptune, it's a synthetic squirrel. So it's a lot softer. It holds a lot of water, a lot of color, but it's a lot softer of a brush, so it's great for wash applications. So I'm going to do with this brush, I'm not going to lift it from my surface. I'll zoom in so you can see it a little better.
And I'm sorry, what color are we using?
So you're going to use all three colors. So you can pick whatever blue or yellow that you'd like. I'm going to use the cadmium yellow and the ultramarine blue dark with the alizarin. I'll typically work from just a limited palette, just because if you're getting a good quality paint and you get the primaries, you really don't need a lot of other colors. You can mix a lot of colors with just the primaries if it's a good quality. So with just clean water, I'm going to start at the top of the tree, and then I'm just going to kind of push my brush back and forth, not lifting it off the paper. You can go back and get more water if you need to. And then I'm just doing the silhouette of a tree. And I'm going to go and do one beside it so that they're connecting. Because you'll see when I add color to it, it travels wherever I've put water. And then if you want to add some more colors to it, so you'll see I'm not pre-mixing colors. I'm just going in with the color right from the pan, and then I'm adding it in, because what it'll do is you can mix actually on the page, and it'll mix itself because you're using a wet on wet technique. I'm just dropping more color in and kind of going back and forth with my strokes. If you did want to pre-mix colors and you have a plate or some palette paper or a palette handy, you can always do that on the side. I'm mixing all three of them together here. And I'm going to add a little bit more blue and yellow because I want almost like a dark green, like a sage green. With just a touch of red. And then I'm just going to drop that in. And if you wanted to experiment with what it would look like doing a wet on dry technique, you could do that as well. So for this tree in the center, I'm going to show you what that would look like. So I'm not going to pre-wet my paper there. And I'm going to still start at the top, similar to what we did for the other trees. And you'll notice the lines are a lot sharper. So I'm going in a back and forth motion, not lifting my hand from the paper, but I'm going to go back and mix the colors. Every time I go back into my paper, I want to use a different color. So when you're doing this, I did 5 trees. You want to always do an odd number. If you want to keep it simple and do 3 trees, then you can. It just is more appealing when you do an odd number. I pre-mixed some green. I'm going in using the same technique we did for the 3rd tree. So a wet on dry. And you'll notice when you do this, because the trees are touching, even though I'm using a wet on dry technique, those colors are still going to spread because my other trees are wet. I'm just going to drop in some red just because it's fun. And just let it do its thing. I just put down some purple, so I used the alizarin crimson red and the ultramarine deep. Now I'm just going back in just with ultramarine deep and just dropping some of that in. So I'm going to do, instead of 5, I'm going to do 7 trees here.
Did you say what the dimension of that card is?
I didn't. So this is a typical greeting card size, 5 by 7.
Thank you.
No problem. I'm going to go in with my last tree. If you already done that card, then you can go back to the first card that you created. Move this out a little bit. And you can take the masking tape and the saran wrap off. So when you take the saran wrap off, you'll see you get kind of an ice effect. And then you want to really gently roll the paper or the masking tape off, just so it doesn't rip. You'll see when I'm rolling the masking tape off, I'm rolling it parallel with the paper. It's ripping a little bit. So those two should be dry. So I'm gonna go in with my masking tape again, and I'm gonna go in the opposite direction. I'm gonna use that technique of putting it on my clothes so it's not as sticky. That was a great technique. Now you can just see all the dog hair that it lifted off.
Relatable.
Yeah. Then we're gonna do the same thing that we did before. So with our softer brush, if you have one, you're just going to take your alizarin crimson or whatever color you've chosen to use. And you're just gonna cover the areas that aren't covered in masking tape. And set it to the side to dry. So similar to what we did before, just lift it off your surface. Unless you have the space for it, then you can just leave it. Set this one to the side. Clean off your area if you need to.
While you're doing that, Kelly, Sheila was asking what kind of surface are you using that you wiped off so easily?
So it's a glass tabletop that I got from IKEA, and it's great because I'll use it when I'm doing watercolors. Super easy to clean. I'll even use it actually for a larger palette when I'm doing acrylic paintings because it's really easy to scrape paint off of it.
Very cool.
And it's inexpensive too. So now that this card's dry, we're gonna learn how to do some really simple basic calligraphy using a brush. So you've probably seen a lot of people use a brush tip marker for this kind of technique, but you can actually do it with a brush. It's very similar. So we're going to use our small brush. And if you have a spare piece of paper, I would just practice on that first. But essentially what it is, it's basic calligraphy, but on the upstroke, you're using very light pressure, and on the downstroke, you're using a lot of pressure. So that line will be thicker. And if you're having trouble doing that, then you can always fake it. So I'll show you how to fake it. So I'm going to use just a practice sheet here. And I'm going to keep this page on my table for the duration whenever we're doing the calligraphy so that you have something to reference. I'll use my alizarin crimson here. So say I'm doing an E. So my upstroke is going to be really thin, so I'm barely applying any pressure. I'll zoom in. Okay. So barely applying any pressure. And then as I come around, I'm applying more pressure on my brush. So I get a thicker stroke and I'm going up again. So a thinner stroke. So you want to just practice this a bit. It helps to have an alphabet that you can reference. You can also practice by just doing this stroke here, where your upstroke is thin, downstroke is thick. Upstroke, downstroke. Now, if you wanted to fake that, you would just do your normal cursive writing. Okay. And then all I would do is on where my downstroke would be, I'm just going to go in beside it with another line and thicken that line a little bit. So I'll keep this beside me. So for this one, I only did cursive for the baby part of my card. So I'm going to do the same thing just because I think it's more interesting when you have different handwriting. So for ice, I did uppercase letters. So I'm going to take my ultramarine blue dark. And you can write this out in pencil first if you'd like. And this is where it helps to also have a ruler because then you can make sure that your lines are straight.
Kelly, Denise is asking if you have any tips for left-handed folks.
That's a good question. I would say it would still be the same if you were working left-handed. You still want to focus on the upstroke being thin and the downstroke being thick. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not, I don't have any more tips than that.
Yeah.
I hope that helps.
I'm left-handed and I couldn't think of anything that would be a good tip for that. It's just kind of following the shapes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, think of these letters just as shapes. And that actually, I use that a lot with any art, even if I'm painting a landscape. Look at everything as shapes just to simplify things. Don't look at things for what they actually are. Okay, so I'm using my ultramarine deep. I'm going to go in just with thin lettering for the ice. I'm going to do uppercase for those two.
So Donna suggests start from right side of paper if you're left-handed, or draw and paint upside down from right to left. It's a good tip.
That's a great tip.
Thank you, Donna.
When you're doing the calligraphy, feel free to lift up after each stroke. It just makes it a little bit easier. So you'll see, so I did my upstroke there, and I'm going to lift and then add more pressure for my downstroke. that one done. And you can do any greeting you'd like. These are just examples. So that card's all done. Now I'm gonna do my happy holidays trees. So similar, I mixed up the calligraphy. So I did happy in my cursive writing, and then I did holidays in bold uppercase. So I'm gonna mix. I want to do it in green, so I'm gonna mix a color on my palette. You don't want too much water when you're doing this because it'll be harder to control. So you can use a pencil first if you'd like. This one's a little bit more challenging because your writing's a little smaller. So just take your time with it. Still the same principle, downstroke is thick, upstroke is thin.
This is an odd question, but could you hold the little brush that you're holding? Could you hold that up close to the camera? Because I wanted to see the tip of it.
Can you see it? There we go. That's better.
Does it like have at the very, very top, like 2 or 3 hairs?
It comes to a really fine point.
Okay,
I would say it's more hairs up there.
okay. Yeah, I think I need to trim mine a little. Okay, thanks.
I'm going to go back to this card. I'm going to carefully take off the masking tape because it should be dry. If you do find it's lifted some of the color, you can just go back with the color that you used and just touch up those areas. And then what I like to do with this is I'll just do some finer details. So in this one, I chose to use a white and I went through my colored areas. But I'm going to do the opposite and I'm going to use that red again, but go through my white areas. So I'm going to do a diagonal line. And I'm kind of resting my hand on my sheet and moving my arm, not my wrist. That'll help you draw a straighter line.
You had a little bit of the problem that I had where when you took the tape off, it pulled up some of the surface of the card.
Yeah, so that can happen. So if it does, I just went and I just touched up that area just with the same color that I was using. What I've also done in cases where it does lift a lot is I'll go back and I'll add some like white splatter so that it looks like snow.
Okay,
Actually gives a
good
really cool,
idea.
so you kind of work with it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it is important to use a painter's tape so that you can avoid some of the ripping. Now that I've done my two diagonal lines in my white spaces, I'm going to go the other way. So I'm going to turn my page and still through those white spaces, I'm going to draw two diagonal lines, just going the opposite direction. I should have like a nice winter plaid card. And then once that dries, we'll do our calligraphy on top of that. So I'll just set that one to the side. So we have three more cards that we're gonna do. I'm gonna jump to the more challenging one to mix up our cards a little bit. So we'll end with the simpler ones. But this one, really take your time with it.
Marilyn asks, for us newbies, could we use a piece of paper to draw the straight lines or a ruler?
Yeah, absolutely. But don't get too caught up on the line being perfectly straight. I actually think it's a lot nicer when it's got a little bit more of a wave to it. So just have fun with it. So for this one, what we're gonna do, so if you have a glass or if you have your roll of masking tape, you're gonna use that for the circle of your globe. So use your pencil and just draw out that circle. And inside the globe, we're gonna be doing a winter cabin scene. I've done it on a larger scale just so you can see it closer up. So we're gonna do the base of the globe. So do two lines going out diagonally from the globe, and then just connect those lines at the base. So now inside the globe, I'm going to start off drawing my cabin. So I'm going to start off with the front of my cabin. Is that dark enough for everyone to see? Okay. And then I'll do the side and the roof. Then as I'm doing this part, I want to draw some of that snow coming down. So I'm going to do a wavy line going through. And I'll just add a little bit of detail, so a little door and a little window. I'm going to do the hill that it's sitting on. And then a little hill behind it. We'll do the road leading up to the cabin. So I'm just doing a squiggly line down to the base. And as I come closer to the base, make it a little bit larger so it gives the impression that it's moving backwards. For the trees, I typically don't draw them in just because similar to what we did in this card, you're making the brush is making the shapes. You're making it up as you go. If you'd like to, however, you can just pencil in really lightly an outline of the tree, just so you know where you're putting your objects. So I'm going to do 2 behind the cabin and then a smaller one in the foreground. As well as just some leafless trees. We're mostly going to use our smaller brush, the Aqua Elite Round, number 3. I'm going to first take my ultramarine light and I'm going to do the sky. So for this technique, you want to work quickly because this is where we're going to bring our salt in. So for this background, I got that blizzard effect because I put salt on the wet paint. So I'm going to go around my trees. It's okay if you go over top of your leafless trees because we're going to use a brown to cover those. So while that's still wet, what you're going to do with table salt, or if you have thicker salt, that works really well too. It'll just give you a larger burst. So it's nice to actually, if you have both of them, mix up the two. So all I'm going to do is just sprinkle that on the surface. And I'll let that sit. I won't touch it after I sprinkle it, and I'll just wait for that to dry. And there's some other, you can do some other effects too. I've seen for this technique, a lot of people using coffee. coffee grounds. That's not something I typically
Can you
recommend.
slow down a little bit, please?
Pardon me?
Can you slow down a
Yeah.
little bit, please?
Yeah.
Thanks.
So just with that sprinkling technique that I use, the salt technique, there's some other techniques that you can use. Yes, the salt is applied to wet paint. I've seen people use coffee grounds, but I don't typically recommend that just because it is acidic. But there's some other effects that you can use. So this is the coffee. So it gives you a similar effect, but just a little bit lighter, more of like a granulation. Rice gives a really cool effect too. You can use alcohol. We did the wet on wet technique. If you have a spray bottle, if you spray onto your wet paint, that gives a really nice effect too. Or if you fill the bottle with wet paint.
Marilyn is asking if you could sprinkle the salt on the snow.
Sorry, on the snow, like on the foreground.
I would imagine so, yeah.
Yeah, you could if you'd like to. I just used it in the sky for my piece just because I wanted it to show more of a blizzardy effect in the background and not affect any of my detail in the foreground.
And can you show those other options again, the techniques on that swatch
Yeah.
sheet you had?
Mm-hmm. So there's dry brushing. This is when you use a lot of paint with just a little bit of water, and you can get some really nice textural effects because you're just dragging your paint across a dry surface. So you pick up the texture of the paper. The wet on wet is what we did in this card. So you're wetting your surface and then you're adding paint and you're just letting the colors spread. A lifting technique. So this is great if you make a mistake because you can re-wet the paint and then with a clean paper towel, you can lift it off. And the salt technique is what we're doing here. The coffee, I put that down because a lot of people use it, but I don't recommend it. Alcohol, it gives you a bursting effect as well. Same with rice. The plastic wrap is what we did on our Ice Baby card. And then masking fluid. Masking fluid is a really nice technique. This is something that you'd be able to shop at Plaza or any art store. All it is, it creates a barrier between your surface and the paint. So you could work through an entire piece, and then after you're done, you could take that area off and it would stay completely white. It would just be the white from your paper. So it's a latex fluid.
Could I just
So-
say, having used many different kinds of masking fluid, that the Pueblo, I think it's Puebo masking fluid works the best. But you cannot leave it on for hours and hours. You know, you have to use it, let it dry, and when your painting's done, rub it off. Don't leave it like till the next day or whatever, because it'll tend to take up some of your paper. Okay.
Thank you. Can I ask how you made the salt in your larger cabin scene look like it's moving in different directions?
So
Did you?
that was really just me experimenting with different sizes of salt. So you'll notice in the center here, I used table salt where it's a lot finer.
Mhm.
And then I used some larger salt around the outside. But it also
but it's,
depends on areas that are more wet. So this area for smaller granulation, for a smaller granulation effect, your paper would be a little bit, it would be more moist than wet. And for larger, it would be more wet. So a lot more water in that area.
so, but you didn't necessarily like tilt the paper to have the paint kind of move in a different direction to get those, it seems like the shapes of that, of what the salt is doing, they're moving in different directions. I'm not sure if I'm asking that question correctly, but
No,
it's
yeah, I know,
fascinating. It's
I know
fascinating.
what you mean. It's really cool because it makes a really cool effect and you really don't do a lot. The salt is really just it does its thing. I didn't move the paper at all. There just may be areas that were more wet than other areas. So the more wet an area, the more kind of starburst effect that you get. And the drier, it's a lot smaller. But once you put the salt on, don't move your paper at all. You just have to wait until it's dry. So I'm going to move into the foreground here. So I'm just moving up some of my salt just so it's not in my way. And for this, I'm going to do a wet on dry. So I'm going to take my ultramarine light and I'm going to do a really light wash of this. You'll see in this painting, it's just a really light blue. So I'm going to concentrate the most color by my cabin to create some shadow. So I'm going to go right at the top of my hill. And once I put that color down, all I'm going to do, I'm going to clean my brush and just with clean water, I'm going to drag that color down. So it should be just a really faint blue. And then I can always go back in and add some more darker tones. Just to create some shadow in the snow. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Focus my darker color around the horizon and then just bring it down just with clean water. You can go a little bit darker in your back hill just to differentiate between the two. Okay. And exactly what we did on the snow in the foreground, I'm going to do a little bit on the roof of my cabin. So I'm just going to do a line kind of right in the middle just to give the impression of some shadow from the snow that's accumulated on the roof. And then I'll do a little bit at the end here. Just where the snow is falling off the roof. With your index finger, just really lightly touch your sky just to see if it's dry. If your sky's dry, then you can brush off the salt. Mine's still a little bit wet, so I'm going to leave it for a little longer. I'm going to take a little bit of my ultramarine blue with just a touch of red just to create a purple, but it should be a little bit more on the blue side. And I'm going to bring it down the right side of my road here. And you can go in with some horizontal lines along this road just to create some interest and some details. An easy thing to do so you see how much snow I have on these trees. If you thought it was easier to just do the tree green and then go back and put the snow on later, you could always do so with an acrylic white or an acrylic white marker. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna, with my pencil, draw out some spaces that I want to leave white and just avoid that when I'm bringing paint into it. Okay. Now I'm gonna mix a green for my trees. You want to make sure before you do your trees, you want to make sure that your sky is dry so the colors don't bleed. So I took my ultramarine light and my cadmium yellow. And then I'm gonna just drop in some color working around the snow that I just drew.
Sarah said she missed what you just did to the tree. Was it sketching out?
Yeah, so all I did was because I have a lot of snow on my trees, right? So all I did, and you could do this a couple different ways, but the way I did it was I just drew in some of those shapes on my tree. So some circular shapes, some irregular shapes. And I'm just avoiding those areas when I'm putting my paint down. But if it was easier and you had some white acrylic or a white acrylic marker handy, you could always wait until your painting is completely dry, and then you could go back in and add snow with that with the marker or brush of acrylic. So now that I've done my trees there, I'm going to mix a brown to do my leafless trees. So all I'm going to do is take the green that I've already mixed and add some alizarin crimson to it.
If you could slow down again, I'm still like, I just got my green together.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
So when I'm doing my trees, I'm missing the next thing that you're starting.
Yeah,
Thanks.
no problem.
And just a reminder to, for you all concerned, this will be recorded, so you will be able to go back to this as early as tomorrow. We'll send an email out with the link, just so you know, don't worry. There'll be a recording, you could rewind it, pause it, watch it as many times as you like after the live workshop.
My sky is mostly dry, so I'm just gonna brush some of the salt off away from my leafless trees. And then using a very light touch because these branches are really thin. So similar to the technique that we used when we were doing the calligraphy. So when you want a thin line, use a really light pressure. And a thick line, you use a little bit more pressure. Okay. For that same brown that we used for these trees, I'm going to use for my cabin. So I'm going to focus my darkest color right underneath the roof. And then underneath, I'm just gonna, using a really light pressure again, I'm gonna do some horizontal strokes throughout my cabin. And then you're gonna do the exact same thing on the front. So right underneath the roof, you're gonna focus most of your color to create some shadow. And you can go directly through, you can go right through your door and your window because you're gonna use colors to go over top of that. So you won't see those lines. Okay. But before, since that's going to be since that's wet still, I'm going to wait to do the door and the window until that's dry. So since I'm mostly done in the inside of my globe, I'm going to do the bottom of my globe, which I just did a gradient effect of red. So I'm going to start with my alizarin crimson. I'm going to focus it on the left-hand side. So you'll see I used a lot of paint. I used a lot of pigment in this area. Okay, so I've blocked off that color. Now all I'm going to do is I'm going to take clean water. So I'm going to wash my brush off and just take clean water and go right underneath where I blocked off that area. And I'm just going to drag that color just with clean water. And you'll notice as we do that, it creates a gradient effect. So it gets lighter as we move to the right-hand side. Okay. I'm just going to blow off some of my salt. Sorry if that's really loud in the microphone. So now we can do our calligraphy while we're just waiting for our cabin to dry. So I did Let It Snow on mine, but you can do any greeting that you'd like. And I'm going to still use my alizarin crimson. And you can draw it out with pencil first if you'd like. My cabin should be dry, so I'm going to go back in with that alizarin crimson and I'm going to put that at my door. And then I'm going to use brown for my window. And then you're all done that card. So that was our most challenging card. We're kind of pressed on time, so I'm gonna quickly go through the other two really simple designs. As Lauren mentioned, if you're not caught up, you can always review and go at your own pace because the video is recorded, but I just want to make sure people see these designs as well. So this one's really fun. So we'll start with this one. So all you're doing for this one, you should have a straw for this technique. And what you're going to do is I mixed a green for my tree. And you're going to use a lot of water for this one. So I'm going to pre-mix my green. I'm going to draw a line down my page. And I'm just going back in. I'm adding a lot of water to my line. And then all you're going to do is you're going to use your straw to blow lines out. And if you need to add more, you just get more water and more paint and load up your brush and just add more to wherever you want more lines. And you can always help the lines out a bit by just kind of peeking them out at the side. And you could make it like a real Charlie Brown Christmas tree with just a few branches, or you could do more branches. And then all I did at the top was add a little bit of a star. And if you move your page around, you can always direct some of that water so that it'll be easier when you go to blow some more lines. And then the last card we have is this really simple, just using the primary colors. These lights. So you're going to start off with a brown. So I'm mixing all three primaries. And then I'm just going to do a wavy line across my page. Some little zigzags throughout, just on the bottom of where I drew my line. This will be the top of my light. And then you're just going to do a teardrop shape with each color. Are there any questions about any of the cards? Is there still something you're stuck on that you'd like me to go over before we're kind of run out of time? Good, great.
We do just have one general question about the cards. Shannon's asking, how do you get the cards flat after the water has made them bumpy?
So I'll usually, after I'm done and the cards are dry, I'll usually just leave them under a heavy book just to flatten them again. I'm going to finish up some of the greetings on my cards that I haven't done yet. So for this one, I'm just going to do a simple uppercase with a really light hand because I want just some fine uppercase letters. This calligraphy is great because the more you practice it and the more you use it, you become a lot quicker at it. Running out of space here. So my lights should be dry. So I just did a darker stroke on the left-hand side and then a thin stroke on the right-hand side. Still with that same brown I used. And then you have 6 cards that are just ready to gift. Are there any
Sarah's
questions
asking,
about
how
any
do you
of the
get all the
products?
salt off the card?
So as if it's dry, you can just wipe it off your paper.
Awesome. So, Kelly, if you're pretty much done, I do want to invite everyone to do a little show and tell if you guys like to share what you created today with us. We love this part. It's so fun to see what everyone creates. So if you're willing to, if you would like to share, you can turn your camera on if you don't have it on. You can change your view in your Zoom to gallery view, and then you can see everyone else's camera. And go ahead and share maybe your favorite 1 or 2 cards that you did today. We'd love to see them. Oh, I see Christina
Oh, really nice.
and Sarah. They're
Beautiful.
so cute. Each one, as Kelly was painting them, I was like, oh, that's my favorite. That's the one I'm gonna do. And now I can't decide.
Oh, they look awesome.
So cute. Donna, nice. Wow. You guys did keep up really well. I'm impressed.
Pretty good.
So
Awesome.
pretty. Awesome. And any last questions? Add them to the chat. We'll happy to answer in the last couple of minutes.
Oh, really nice, Betsy. Beautiful.
Very cool. Awesome. Great. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, I think we're good for the day. We hope you all have a really great holiday. Enjoy some time off if you have it. And we'll see you guys in the new year for our first January event on the 30th. So thank you all for coming today. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Have a good one. See you on the next one.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Happy
Bye.
holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.
Thank you.